Welcome back. President Trump's deployment of the National Guard in L.A. is sparking a new wave of legal questions and uncertainty. The president is citing a rarely used federal law that allows him to be put atop the chain of command in order to deploy 2,000 California National Guard troops. Now, Governor Gavin Newsom tells NBC's Jacob Soboroff he'll file a lawsuit challenging that authority.
He's exacerbated the conditions. He's, lit the proverbial match. He's putting fuel on this fire ever since he announced he was taking over the National Guard. An illegal act, an immoral act, an unconstitutional act, and we're going to test that theory with a lawsuit. Under his executive order, it specifically notes, and under what the DOD did, is they had to coordinate with the governor of the state. They never coordinate with the governor of the state. With no problem working collaboratively in a mutual aid system with local law enforcement, but there's a protocol, there's a process. He didn't care about that.
Joining us now is James Sample, Hofstra University professor of law. And here with me on set, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin and Jeremy Peters, New York Times reporter and an MSNBC contributor. Lisa, we'll start with you. Does the governor have a successful argument in this legal challenge that he's set to make?
I think that he might, Allie. And obviously, the instances in which a governor of the state has sued the president of the United States for invoking a federal authority to call in the National Guard are few and far between. If there are any, I can't recall them off the top of my head. Yeah. The statute that Trump is basing this memorandum off of essentially says that the president can call in the National Guard as federal service whenever the United States is invaded or in danger of invasion by a foreign nation, or, for example, there is a rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. And that's where I think Governor Newsom does have a point, that whatever is going on in Los Angeles right now, which both he and Mayor Karen Bass say that LAPD, in combination with existing federal civilian law enforcement, had well in hand, it's not an invasion, it's not a danger of an invasion, and it's not a rebellion or a danger of a rebellion. Statutorily, they're going to say it doesn't fit. They're also going to say it's an infringement in all likelihood of their 10th Amendment rights as a state to be free from certain interference by the federal government.
And I think that's all really important, especially when you take it in context of how the administration has talked about immigration over the course of the last several years, both on the campaign trail and here in the White House. This idea that there is some kind of a national emergency around it, I imagine that's something that we could hear in this legal filing from their side once, of course, the legal part of this is fully underway. But, James, there seems to be some uncertainty over the law that's cited in Trump's order justifying the deployment of the National Guard. So what exactly would that law permit? And does this current scenario constitute the kind of major crisis that would fit it?
It's a really good question. And to Lisa's point and Lisa's answer to your question, Allie, we are in uncharted territory. And I feel like we say that over and over again in the Trump administration in all sorts of contexts. We talk about aggressive uses of executive power. We talk about unprecedented or uncharted waters. This really is that. And as a number of your prior guests in the earlier segment said, when you haven't done something, in this instance, invoking this particular law since 1965. I mean, not only were you not alive in 1965, even I wasn't alive in 1965. That was not yesterday. So when we're talking about something that is used that rarely, and by that rarely, we mean in the absence of the governor's request, the governor's consent, we just don't have a whole lot of guideposts in terms of the legal framework for whether or not this is constitutional. But to Lisa's point on the constitutional framework, we are really now in the upside down. If you think about the left-right dichotomy of America, the red-blue dichotomy of America, normally the federalism argument, the 10th Amendment point, is the point being pressed by conservatives, by Republicans, generally speaking, in relatively conservative states against, for example, the Affordable Care Act. Here, we're flipping that system entirely on its head. We're flipping that frame entirely on its head. And we're talking about a Republican president of the United States invoking an executive authority that is, I think at this point, so far, my answer to whether or not what he's done so far is illegal is, I think it's ill-advised, but not yet illegal. If, however, these individuals who have been co-opted and conscripted into the federal force from the state National Guard are called upon to do things that they are not authorized to do under Section 10, Title 10, as opposed to under the Insurrection Act, which has not yet been invoked, then in that scenario, I think California is likely to have a very successful challenge on its hands.
And those are, I think, some really helpful goalposts for us as we try to continue watching and then layering the legal ramifications on top of what we're seeing on the ground. And we've talked here about how there are so few precedents for us to pull on. Yamiche was actually teeing us up with one of the few of them, which is the last time a president sent National Guard troops in to deal with civil unrest without cooperation from a state's governor, which was in 1965 when, Yamiche was mentioning this, President Lyndon B. Johnson bypassed Alabama's governor to protect civil rights demonstrators marching from Selma to Montgomery. These present circumstances aren't that, Jeremy, and yet it's where the most recent historical precedent that we have.
Right, and I doubt that that historical precedent even occurred to Trump as he was making this decision. This is not an administration, a White House that feels very bound by history, or it would seem the Constitution even. So what this stems from is not only a disregard for norms and laws, but also the feeling that Trump missed out on a chance to do this in 2020 when there actually was an emergency, when cities like Minneapolis were really under siege by violent protesters and businesses got looted and burned. You're talking about 1,000 businesses damaged in Minneapolis alone. That was a scenario where you could have seen the need for an act this serious. So they've been, they've had this itchy trigger finger for so long now, just waiting for an opportunity to do this. And they kind of blow it with this really sporadic protest activity in Los Angeles. Yes, a lot of it was bad. They're burning of cars, assaulting ICE officers. That stuff is clearly illegal. And I don't hear, by the way, any Democrats out there saying that they like that that's good, that they should be, this is a First Amendment act protected under the Constitution. No, there are clearly anarchists in these protests that need to be dealt with swiftly by law enforcement. But it's a pretty, compare these pictures to what we saw in the summer of 2020. And this is not the kind of incident that Trump would have justification for taking a step this serious.
And yet, you and I have covered this group of people around the president for almost 10 years now. This is a group that I think tries to find moments of opportunity.
Right.
I mean, what do you think the conversations are that are happening inside the president's inner circle, which, as we were pointing out in the last segment, has way less guardrails this time around than at any point in 2016 or during his time out of office but campaigning to get back in 2020 and 24?
Well, I can tell you exactly what they are from what I've been told. It's do it. Make an example of these people. And to that end, they will, the Trump administration and his acolytes, they will exaggerate the illegal activity that's taking place. They will, just as we saw back in 1992, actually, during the Rodney King riots, they will exaggerate the involvement of people here illegally in the protests. Anything they can to kind of justify this, expect them to do. I just don't think this is the example that is really going to have public opinion behind them.
And yet it comes against the backdrop, and we'll dig into this later in the show, of Stephen Miller and other top officials demanding that ICE do more on the deportation front, criminal history or not. But Lisa, if we can circle back to the legal piece of this too, you're seeing the White House now have to walk back the idea that maybe they would arrest the governor or the mayor if they intervened or interceded in any of these operations on the ground. The fact that that walk back even exists, I mean, what does that tell you about the legal line that is once again being towed here?
I think the legal line is a really fuzzy one. The last time I checked the Constitution, deep regret at how you acted in a past scenario is not a constitutional justification. But in terms of, I think that was a moment where Tom Homan got a little bit too cute by half, right? Because he was asked what would happen if Mayor Bass or Governor Newsom tried to obstruct law enforcement authority, and he said they would be arrested too. I don't think he meant to suggest that they are under investigation. His point was only that obstruction of law enforcement activity would be treated seriously no matter who it's done by. The question here is what constitutes obstruction? If you're not physically obstructing law enforcement with your body, is there a scenario in which this White House would constitute actions taken by the governor or the mayor in their respective roles as obstruction? We'll have to wait and see. The fact that they walked that back and de-escalated what could have been a growing conflict on top of this whole landscape, I think is overall a good thing. But again, we are awaiting today what Governor Newsom said to our colleague Jacob Soboroff last night, that he's going to take some legal action, and I'm looking forward to seeing what that is.
Yeah, and is that then construed as something that does impede the operations that they're trying to do on the ground? I think the words that we hear from the White House are so important here, as they always are, but as they try to build the case to continue forward with the operations on the ground in L.A. and other places, we'll be watching that closely. Lisa Rubin, James Sample, and Jeremy Peters, thank you all for your expertise.